Hi everyone! I hope you're all having a great week. My husband and I just came back from vacation, and though our vacation was really wonderful, it's always really good to be home. My husband Damien and I met 6 years ago while we were both traveling independently in New Zealand, and in our relationship, travel has continued to be one of the great pleasures we enjoy together. Over the last 2 years, however, the pandemic has made this a little bit more challenging. Our last major international trip together was over 3 years ago. And needless to say, with a pandemic still happening, it was a little bit daunting to get on an airplane to travel. But I was pleasantly surprised at how well it actually went. Not only do I love to travel with my husband, I also love to travel in my imagination. And this week's painting is some exploration of our universe as I explore it in my own imagination. Sometime in the past, in one of my previous videos, I mentioned the fact that I really love to watch a lot of documentaries. I watch a lot of documentaries on the universe, the creation of our planet, you name it, I love watching it, especially if it has to do with our world. And I spend a lot of time watching these documentaries and dreaming of what it would be like to be traveling in space. I don't think I have the constitution to actually be able to do this quite well. I get very motion sick even in a car, and sometimes even when I'm driving. So I don't think space is really in the plans for me. But when I have a chance to watch documentaries, or even recently I've been watching a lot of Star Trek, I love to dream of what it would be like to have a chance to be out exploring the universe and seeing the stars from a different perspective. I think watercolors lend themselves really well to creating an abstract painting that reflects on images we might see in the universe. Of course, this is completely made up in my own imagination. I don't think there's anything out there that would remotely look anything like what I'm painting, but it's just fun to put the paint down on the paper, add some water to it, and let it flow and see what different shapes get created with the water movement. And I imagine that in the vast open spaces of our universe, when all the stardust and the different elements that travel in our universe are moving around, that in some ways maybe it moves or they move in similar ways to how my paint moves on the paper. I find nebulas in particular to be very beautiful, and so I'm sort of using some of my favorite colors to do an interpretation of a nebula in a far away galaxy. My process for today's painting is very similar to the process I follow for many of the paintings I create, especially my abstract watercolor paintings. I oftentimes will start, like I did today, by spritzing water on the page and then dabbing some color onto that water and watching how the paint moves on the paper. When I want to apply colors that I don't want to blend together, I will let the first layer of color dry, and then I'll spritz a little bit more water and add a second color. So for instance, here as I'm painting, I'm adding this Quinacridone deep gold, and if I had let the first layer of paint remain wet before adding this color, the neutral tint as well as the Quinacridone deep gold would have blended together, and it would have created a bit of a brownish color, and that's not really what I wanted to do in this case. So in order for me to keep the Quinacridone gold more vibrant, I simply let the first layer of paint dry, and then after it was completely dry, I spritzed my paper again so that I could help my Quin gold move more freely, and I started to dab that color in onto the paper. I really love Quinacridone Deep Gold, but I'm always a little disappointed that it seems to lose its vibrancy as it dries. So to help keep that color a little bit more vibrant, I add some nickel azo yellow, and this is a very vibrant color that doesn't tend to lose its vibrancy when it dries, and I find that the two of them together really complement each other well. Painting for me is very much a time to experiment and play. And so not only do I experiment with colors, but I also experiment in the tools I use, but also in how I use them. So you'll notice that I have, in many instances during the process of this painting, I've used my brush in ways that are not typical, meaning that instead of creating strokes, I have been rolling my paintbrush on the paper, and as I was moving it, I was moving it up and down. I'm replicating this same type of movement by using an elegant writer marker here. And I do this because I want to vary the type of marks that I'm making, and I don't want to make them very regular. I want them to be irregular and to have sort of their own personality, if you will. I love elegant writers because their ink is water soluble, and so now I'm using some water to spritz over that ink and to basically see what types of different shapes can come about. When I spritzed the ink with water, some blues seemed to be bleeding from the ink, and so I decided that I was going to follow the ink's lead, and I was going to start to add some of those same colors, that same blue, in other parts of my painting. I'm always a little bit on the fence about this color I'm adding right now. It's a granulating color, and I really love it in the pan, but every time I apply it, it seems to be a little bit too light, and I always feel like I need to add to it. So I'm still, I'm not going to give up on it, but I can't say it's my very favorite color just yet. Maybe I'll discover another way to use it that I'll like better, but every time I use it, I do feel like I need to add some turquoise, and I probably will do that. And there I go. Some of the fun of exploring while painting is not only the discoveries that you make about, the various techniques that you can use or the colors that you can apply, but you also start to discover some things about yourself and your own preferences when it comes to creating. And I'm no different in that way. Every time I create, I notice that I have a tendency to gravitate towards very vibrant colors. I try sometimes to make it a little bit more mute, or a little bit more, not pastel, but maybe more neutral, and every single time I feel a need to reach for some brighter colors. So that says something about me and how I like to create. And we're all different that way, and I think that's one of the reasons, in fact, I know that's how we are all contributing in our own different way to art. we have our own unique spin on things, and that is important in creating or developing our own style. I know for a long time, and even now, I still have those moments where I wonder, what is my style? And it's becoming more and more obvious as I keep painting. I really love to work in abstract. I really love to work with bright, vibrant colors. I also really love to work in painting portraits or drawing. There are definitely mediums that I'm more drawn to. For instance, I really love watercolors and I really love acrylic paints. I've also done a lot of resin work, and I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to watercolors and acrylics and resin is because these mediums can be very fluid. And I'm a self-professed mermaid at heart, and I love water. I love how it flows, I love how it moves, and I love how it feels against my skin and, how it contributes to our life. So when I'm painting and I'm creating using mediums that flow more freely, there's something about that that really speaks to my soul. And I'm always listening for those little cues that my gut will give me on the things that really bring me joy. And this process that I'm, going through right now in front of you, painting a watercolor abstract, is really very much a part of my own style, and it's something that I thoroughly enjoy. It kind of reminds me of being a kid and, playing for hours and hours. I used to paint and probably draw more than painted back then, but art has always really been a part of my life, and I can still to this day, I can get lost in time when it comes to creativity. I can commit hours to it and not really even see the minutes go by. Time just seems to fly by when I'm creating because I am so mindful of what I'm doing and I'm so completely in the moment that I get carried away. And it's a great joy to be able to have these experiences in creativity. And I feel that it's also very good for me from a wellness perspective. When I'm creating is probably when I'm at my most mindful. And for this reason, it's no surprise to me that I also feel very relaxed in that process. As is typical for me in my abstract painting process, I usually don't have a plan, and today is no different. I really didn't have a plan. I kind of let myself be led by the idea of exploring the universe. And then as I was going along, adding my colors, I started to think of different things that I might want to add. And so I added these circles. So I am a lover of circles. I love circles. I tend to gravitate towards them, especially in mark making. And I like to keep things very simple. So another simple thing that I really enjoy doing is just creating some simple lines. And to create these lines, I look at the various shapes that I can see in my background, and I just basically follow along with these shapes and I create these little vertical lines. It's a very meditative process to do that. It's repetitive. There's not anything complicated about it, so I can just let go of having to think about what I'm doing and I can just enjoy the process. Here I've started adding some white dots using my white pen. Normally my pen works relatively well, but this one is starting to get a little bit low on ink, and so the ink isn't flowing quite as well as it normally would. And not only that, but there's a lot of dark ink underneath it that is water soluble, and as soon as I cover it with white, that ink tends to bleed into the white, and so my whites are not as bright as I'd like them to be. So I've taken out a stylus and some white gouache, and I'm going over these dots with the stylus. Here I'm continuing to work with gouache, and at this time my micro mini brush, to add some little white vertical lines in some of the black vertical lines that I created earlier, just to break it up a little bit, but also to create a little bit more contrast. I'm still not feeling very satisfied with that granulating color that I added at the top of my painting. So I'm using my black fountain pen to create a little bit more of different elements in dark ink to create some diversions, I guess, or distractions that will distract, I guess, away from that blue and draw the attention to those little dotted circles that I'm creating. I wanted to add a little bit more white, so I pulled out my white pen again, and I'm trying to create what looks like stars that are shining in some of using some of the dots. But again, my pen isn't working super well, and I'm not 100% sure that I actually like what I did here. So in just a little bit, I'll be doing something to cover that up. So like in any other intuitive painting process, I just really am letting my intuition guide me, and sometimes I try things and I really like it. Like I'm really liking these little dots that I'm creating right now, because it again helps to create a distraction from that blue that I'm not so crazy about in the background. But when I created these little white stars, my gut said no. So I pulled out my fine tip brush and some gouache, and I'm gonna paint over them by creating some other circles. And this will just continue along with the theme of the other circles that I have created in my painting, and I'm actually liking this a whole lot more. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is happening is that, of course, the ink underneath is bleeding through that gouache. And so I'm gonna go over it a few more times before I'm done, because I want to make it as bright as possible, those little dots as bright as possible. And here we go. You can still see that the ink did bleed through a little tiny bit, but I really like the final result of this painting, and my nebula seems to have come to life, and I'm very happy with it. Wherever you are on our beautiful planet, I hope life is treating you well today. Please don't hesitate to reach out by sharing questions or comments in the section down below. Thank you again for joining me on this journey. I hope you have a wonderful week, and happy creating!